Good morning, and welcome to Think and Grow Rich Live Mastermind. My name is Dr. Peter A. James, and I'm excited to be with you all this morning as we dive on into another week of this phenomenal text of Think and Grow Rich with Napoleon Hill, this text by Napoleon Hill. And I'm so excited today because I'm sorry, folks, we do not have a special guest with us, but we have our angels today who are all going to dive into a conversation, a master class of sorts around two chapters in this text, two interesting chapters, chapters 10 and chapters 11 of Napoleon Hill's phenomenal text. And these chapters revolve around two interesting subjects: sex transmutation and the subconscious mind. So if you're with us early this Saturday morning, grab your coffee, get in your chairs, buckle your seatbelts, because this is going to be an interesting conversation about those topics. I can talk all day about them. I can get started, but I won't do you any justice unless I bring in these phenomenal, my phenomenal co-hosts. First and foremost, the leadership strategist, Galen Bingham. Good morning to you, sir. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. I am so excited about this conversation. I don't know that we've ever done these two principles together, and they fit together. So it's going to be interesting to talk about how we see these two fitting into this success philosophy. We've already had some pre-show conversations, and the Oprah Winfrey rule is always never have a conversation before the interview. So it's going to be always interesting to see if we can recapture what we talked about to share with our viewers.
Galen, I don't know about you. I'm excited because we were talking about clients before the show. We're going to dive back in to see how we can better affect our subconscious and how this sex transmutation thing fits into all of that as well. I'm excited, but you and I can't just do it by ourselves because we have the master wealth builder here with us. Ann McNeil, good morning to you. How are you doing today?
Listen. If I were any better, I would be both of you this morning, not just one, but two. Two, because it is a phenomenal opportunity when you think about being able to share these two principles, and we'll talk about them shortly, but I want to just share what Napoleon Hill tells us about the word transmute as we talk about the sex transmutation of our energy. And he tells us that it's simply the changing or transference of one element of energy into another. And so I'm excited when you talk about this other principle, the subconscious mind, which is the connecting link, and the fact that it consists of, again, a field of energy, which is our consciousness, the impulse of thought. And so what better opportunity do we have than to discuss the impulse of thoughts as we learn how to transmute these thoughts from one form of energy into another as we maximize the use of our subconscious mind. This is going to be awesome.
I want to get us off started. We have a video early on this session today, but before we dive into that video, I'm going to read something from Napoleon Hill's Sex Transmutation chapter in this book on page 191 that I have, the 10 stimuli that our mind responds most freely to, the 10 stimuli. And those of you who are listening, allow yourself to reflect on how your mind responds to these stimuli on a day in and day out basis, right? Because we sometimes think we have no control over what goes on in our mind. But after this conversation, I'm hoping that you're going to realize that you have more control than you realize, right? And so, number one, again, the 10 stimuli to which the mind responds freely, most freely. Number one, the desire for sexual expression. Number two, love. Number three, a burning desire for fame, power, or financial gain, sometimes just money. Number four, music. Number five, close friendship between either those of the same sex or those of the opposite sex. Number six, huge one, a mastermind alliance based on the harmony of two or more people who ally themselves with spiritual or temporal advancement. Number seven, mutual suffering such as that experienced by people who are persecuted. Number eight, auto-suggestion. Number nine, these last two are interesting. Number nine, fear. I'm gonna pause on that one. And then number 10, narcotics and or alcohol. Controversial right off the top as we reflect on what our minds respond most quickly to, those 10 things there. On the other side of this video, Galen, I'm gonna ask you, let's dive into some of those 10 and see how they impact us on a day in and day out basis, both positively and negatively. So can you intro the video for us there, Galen?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I always enjoy the video because this is an opportunity for us to take a step back and take a look at how these principles work in harmony with one another. And although we typically only talk about one principle at a time, it's the connection, it's the coordination, it's the gumbo mix that really makes this thing powerful. So take a listen to the video, watch the video, and think about how everything comes together. And we'll talk with you again on the other side.
Number one is desire. Napoleon Hill said that everything starts with a burning desire, a compelling reason for doing what it is we do. Step two is faith, having belief in our ability to attain that which we desire. Step three is what we call autosuggestion. Autosuggestion simply means being very intentional about the things that we are pouring into our thoughts, into our brains, and into our consciousness. Our brains, our minds will receive everything automatically, but we have to work extra hard to make sure that the positive things are what we are feeding ourselves, because those positive thoughts are going to turn into positive actions. Step number four is specialized knowledge. No one person knows everything, even about whatever their particular area of expertise might be. And the value of the mastermind principle is using the specialized knowledge of other people. Step number five is imagination, the workshop of the mind. Everything starts with our imagination and our thoughts, the burning desire to transform those thoughts into our reality. In order to do that, we have to take a look at step 6, which is organized planning. That is how we crystallize our desire into action, organizing ourselves. Having the thought and not acting on the thought isn't going to get us anywhere. We have the thought, we go through the organized planning to transform that thought into action. Step number 7 is decision. What Napoleon Hill said is the mastery of procrastination. Napoleon Hill said that the antidote to procrastination is simply to make a decision and then move on that decision. Step 8 is persistence. We have to have a sustained effort which is induced by our faith in order to achieve our goals. One of Napoleon Hill's books I love, even the title, 3 Feet from Gold. Those people who became rich during the gold rush in the Wild Wild West days didn't do that because they were necessarily smarter or had better information than anyone else. It's because they stayed just a little bit longer. Sometimes people left when they were just literally 3 feet from gold. So hanging in there, being persistent, is step number 8. Step number 9, the power of the mastermind, the driving force. None of us can accomplish anything on our own. Everybody, I don't care who you are, from the most prominent person to the person who might be considered the lowest on the totem pole, everybody has someone who helped them get to where they are. And the power of the mastermind is being able to use those influences around us, use the thoughts, use the knowledge, use the exploration of other people to help us in achieving our goal. Step number 10, the mystery of sex transmutation. This title can be a little confusing, but essentially what the mystery of sex transmutation means is that we oftentimes in our society think of sex as being purely physical. It is absolutely physical, but what Napoleon Hill teaches us is that sex also has an emotional element, and that sex is the strongest of our desires. That if we can take our sexual energy, transform that into positive, creative influences, it can propel us to new heights. And so we spend quite a bit of time talking about the mystery of step 10, which is sex transmutation. Step number 11 is the subconscious mind, which Napoleon Hill tells us is the connecting leap between our human mind and the infinite intelligence, the source of all thought, the source of all creativity. Conscious mind, we spent some time talking about how we use that through the influence of autosuggestion and what we're feeding into our mind. Step number 12, which is the brain, the broadcasting and receiving station of thought. Final step number 13, the sixth sense, the door to the temple of wisdom. This is the final step through which infinite intelligence may and will communicate voluntarily without any effort from or demands by the individual. The principle is the apex of the philosophy. It can be assimilated, understood, and applied only by first mastering the other 12 principles.
Alrighty, folks, the 13 steps, the 13 principles that we all know so well. It's so good to dive into those and allow us to get a good overview of all of this. But I'm going to ask my co-host today, if we can go to those 10 stimuli on page 191 or thereabouts in chapter 10 of this text. And then let's begin to have a conversation. Because before the show started today, we all know that we dove on into how we respond to stimuli, oftentimes negative stimuli. And especially as we think about our clients or people that we work with, and how sometimes that response to negative stimuli can take us down an avenue that is hard to get out of. Let me even say not even avenue, take us down a well that is hard to get out of. And no matter what we do or what they do, they just can't get out of the facing of the stimuli, the facing of this challenge, the facing of this daunting thing or task that's right in front of them. And now communication, the body language, the behavior can often bring others around them down as well. And just steamroll, snowball into something way worse than it ever could be. I wanted to hear both of your take on how you've been able to switch or shift the narrative from and respond differently to stimuli that affects you on a day in and day out basis.
I'll get started. I'll get started because I want to throw this to Ann to bring in a good part of what we were talking about before we went live. And this conversation always brings to my mind work done by Lisa Barrett, where she talks about how emotions are made and how we tend to think that emotions just happen and emotions just come and we can't control them. And what she suggests is that things happen and we then label we label what happened as either positive or negative, as a positive or negative emotion, and that begins the cycle, right? Because this thing happened to me, because someone cut me off, that means that this is a bad day, and I'm just having a bad day. Oh my gosh, everything's just terrible, right? And then the cycle begins. And we started talking before the show, and you were helping me with a client situation that I'm in, where one of my clients is just kind of in a bad situation, and everything she looks at, she can absolutely identify how that's a sign of it getting worse. And one of the things you shared with me, and I want to bring you into this, is that we need to remember that things that happen is just data. It's data, but we are the ones that label that data. And so I want to bring that back to your question, Dr. Peter, about how do we leverage these 10 stimuli. I see this as how we can be purposeful and be intentional about creating the mindset that we want to have, rather than letting the situation dictate our emotion. How can we be intentional about cutting off that negative stimuli loop to create what we want? So for me, music is a big influence, right? Music is a big influence. Alcohol influence, right? There are ways that we can do that. There are ways that we can do things that will bring us back to the emotion that we want to have, rather than being at effect to what's going on around us.
So, Anne, your thoughts?
Yeah, first I want to go to the subconscious mind in regards to your question. And as you were talking, I was just posting something in the YouTube that says, that our subconscious mind, I like to go back to something Shakespeare said first, and then I'll go to what Napoleon Hill says. Shakespeare says that, nothing is either good nor bad. It is our thinking that makes it so. Nothing is either good nor bad. It is our thinking that makes it so. And so when we begin to learn how to call it optimization data, we process the data to connect to our desire. Now, Napoleon Hill says that the mind works day and night. This is the subconscious mind. It works day and night through a method of procedure unknown to us. And it draws upon the infinite intelligence, if you will, for power, which will voluntarily, here we go, transmute your desire into its physical equivalent. Can I say that again? We're talking about the transference of energy, whether you call it sex transmutation or you call it the subconscious mind. How do you, as you're listening to this and as we're having this conversation, it's a master class. And I'd like to challenge each of us to think about, how do you process the data? How do you, as Napoleon Hill says, how do you use your own subconscious mind day and night? How do you use it? We don't need to understand how it works, but the mind draws upon forces from the infinite. This is powerful, which transmute our desires into its physical equivalent. So if we're desiring the negative conversation about, oh, woe is me, and we continue to get more of, oh, woe is me, this is the transference or the transmutation of that energy from a negative to a more negative, if you will, versus transferring it from a negative to a positive. So those would be my thoughts. And I think that we have to also remember that our subconscious mind does not know the difference between what's true and false. It only knows and feeds upon what we feed it every day, day in and day out. So Galen, that goes to what we talked about in terms of how do we each transfer that energy call it transmutation. It's sexual energy. Energy is energy. How do we choose to transfer it?
Please allow me to jump on in there, Galen, real quick. I'm going to play the contrarian role, also known as the devil's advocate here a little bit.
And I'll be your angel too.
And you will be my angel today. Yes, please. My job is stressful and toxic. My boss doesn't like me. My partner is just doing activities that they're not supposed to do, and they're just making the household just so rough. My kids are going down a path that's not great. You see where I'm going with all these real world scenarios. There's no jobs out there. I'm not, and I'm not saying that, and these stimuli are not all on the up and up. They are, but the phrase, and I wrote down that quote, Anne, thank you so much for saying that, from William Shakespeare. That's so powerful. But when you're in the midst of it, in the thick of it, and it's all around you, and we've all been there, how do we get out? What are some strategies that you both have used to get out of that well, if you will?
I'll go first.
Galen had something to say, so let's go to him.
But before we get to strategies, okay. I wanted to unpack something that Anne said, and Peter, you alluded to, and I believe other people might be reacting to. Anne said, we could have a negative emotion, and it could be reinforcing what we want. Something similar to that. And my initial reaction was, why would anyone want to have a negative reaction? And here's my answer to that. That the human brain wants to be right. We whatever we perceive to be true about the world, we're always looking to prove that that's the case. And so if I believe that I'm having a bad day, and someone comes along really cheerfully and says, no, it's a beautiful day, the weather's great and all this opportunity, we're going to argue with them. No, this is a terrible day. This happened to me. This happened to me. This happened to me. All these negative things. We do that internally as well. We're constantly trying to prove that what we believe to be true actually is. And one of the things that and this is back to strategy, one of the things that it's easier for me to coach others than it is for me to do it for myself. One of the things I often coach others to consider is something can be real and not be true, right? So my emotions can be real. What I think can be real. They just might not be true. It might be real that I'm not feeling good today. It might be real that I don't see opportunity. It might be real that my kids are getting on my nerves. It might not be true that that's my reality, but it's real in my psyche right now. And so that's one of the things that I try to do from a strategy standpoint is, how can I disassociate the reality of what I'm experiencing from the truth of what's actually going on? Because the truth is, it's just data. Like Anne said, that's the truth. It's not good or bad. It's just data. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
I'll go second. Let's go back to the question about all of these things, because we all go through these things.
Sure.
How do I handle it? I am encouraged from the word. I'm encouraged from the word. Napoleon Hill told us that, that this mind is working with infinite intelligence. Now, for me, I call infinite intelligence my God. Now, with that foundation, how do I process when all of these things around me, family, work, bills, debt, we talked about my car being totaled by my friend. brand new 735 IL BMW years ago. I am reminded from infinite intelligence and the word that God hardens the heart. God hardens, yes, I said it, look it up. God hardens the heart of others to move us closer to him. Can I say that again?
Please.
Don't believe me? Let's go to the book. Remember the story when the devil said, Job, you have him surrounded. God hardened the heart to allow everything that happened to Job. Can we all agree with that? And if you're listening in the chat on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, just put yes in the chat. And what about the story of Pharaoh, when we know the man of God told him to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go?
Mm.
Does anybody remember that story? Can you put yes in the chat? Co-host, come on, somebody. But on the way, the word says that as he was on the way to Pharaoh, Pharaoh didn't harden his own heart. God hardened his heart. God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Why would that happen? My bills can't be paid, my job, my husband, my children, all these things. Why me? Why me? I thought you loved me. Why me? We are in the book talking about sex transmutation, subconscious mind, the two, how they fit. How do we transfer all of these things and what's going on around us to something positive? Recently, I was on travel and I left my books. I like to read, before going to bed. And I said, gosh, I left my books. So what do? You reach over to the drawer and you pull out what? A book. A book, just whatever's in the drawer, you pull it out. I pulled it out and I love to do this, just open whatever it is. I just open to it. I do read a proverb a day, by the way. But I opened, this is at night, I opened it up and it just fell on this story of David and Saul. And for another time, I realized that God also hardened Saul's heart against David. I'm saying, well, why would you do that? We are going to the question. I hope I'm answering your question, Peter. So my response and how I internalize things when they happen, remember now, they're not good or bad. So let's go back to the premise. All these things are not good things. They're not bad things, Peter. They're just things that's happening. And see, because my bills are not being paid, I cannot, which I used to do, I cannot fault the people who I'm indebted to because I created the debt. It's not their responsibility that I didn't take care of some things that I should take care of and put myself in a position, which I used to do, and curse the creditors when I took their money or I took their products and now I can't pay for it. And so I just really want to go back to the foundation of these things. And oftentimes we bring these things on us, but we're not willing to agree and go back to what God is doing, is putting us in a position where it brings us closer to him. I hope this is making some semblance of sense.
And it does, Ann, and I appreciate that, because now it made me think. I even actually, in my mind, I was going even deeper. I was even thinking about, well, Ann, what about these wars and these pandemics and everything that's going on around us? This is what people will come back with us. But then it made me, what you were saying as it relates to the Pharaoh or to all of these biblical stories that we know so well, it took me back to Romans 8:28 in the Bible. And we know all things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose.
Say it.
Right? And
Yep.
so now how do we keep that front and center, even in the midst of the chaos? It's challenging. I'm going to be honest. It's challenging as human beings. It's very challenging to do that. But very similar to what is spoken a lot about in this text. We almost have to practice it. We almost have to begin repetition of this. Part of that is auto-suggestion. Part of that is surrounding ourselves with like-minded individuals. There's so many things that we need to step into to prepare us for that chaos, because it's coming. It's coming in some form or fashion. And then you have to ask yourself at that point, how are you responding to that? Galen, I want to pull you back in to this. We've gone really, really, really deep today.
Yeah. I was thinking about a couple of things, and then you caused me to think about something else totally
Mhm.
different. I was thinking about the connection between the subconscious mind, the mystery of sex transmutation, and those two principles connect in that we create the meaning around things,
Mm.
and we determine the meaning. And that's why you can see a rose, and a rose is just a thing. But if you give it to someone that you are um, intending to attract, it takes on a different meaning. And the meaning is first in the mind of the creator. It's in the mind of the person who's giving the gesture. And you're turning this rose, which is just a plant, into a symbol of something else. And so that's what this mystery of sex transmutation is about. How can you take this desire and turn it into something else? And it happens in your mind, it happens in your subconscious. But how can you do this on purpose, rather than letting the outside influences dictate how you feel? How
Mhm.
can you determine how you want to feel, and then find that find a way to transmute that emotion into something else?
Galen, say that again. I love that phrase you said. We create meaning around everything in life,
Yeah.
but then we have a choice after that creation of that meaning. We have to choose what our actions, our behaviors, or even our thoughts will look like after that meaning that we created. And then also have to go back to and it's none of it is good or bad. We are creating and dictating what that is, and then we're digesting whatever we create.
You know,
Am I
I like
am I on point? Go ahead.
I like the way you brought in Shakespeare. I like the way Sakaru says it. Evidently he's paraphrasing Shakespeare. He says, "If it is true that nothing has meaning until I assign meaning to it, why would I ever assign a negative meaning to anything?
Mm.
Because I'm in control of that." And let's go back to what Ann was saying about, Dr. Peter, talking about this is easy for us to talk about while we're
Mm.
on YouTube, we're on the screens, and we're kind of amen corner, that kind of thing. But when you're in it, it's very different. And what I try to do is I try to remind myself that I'm in a situation. I am not the situation, right? How do I distance myself from thinking that I am the situation, right?
Mhm.
If let's just say there's a writer's strike in entertainment, and if you're in the entertainment industry, even tangentially, it's easy to think, oh my god, I'm not employable, I can't get a job because nothing's coming my way. Well, you're in a situation, it's not that you're not employable, you're just in a situation where the industry that you're typically serving, they're not working right now because of the strike. But how do you remind yourself that you're not unemployable? You're just in a situation, and it's your responsibility to reframe and redefine what that situation means.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm making any sense.
You both are actually very, very well. I'm going to go even deeper though now, because our world is very chaotic and violent and challenging. Let's just face it. So just even think about the last few years of our lives or our existence. Again, pandemics. Now we're in the midst of two wars. going on in society right now as we're recording this, and violence in our streets, people toting guns and doing this and that. You know, if I'm that individual that can get paranoid around all this stuff that's coming in on the news, or maybe that I'm experiencing, I'm going to say, Galen, and yeah, that's nice and all that we create meaning, but I'm not creating that war. I'm not creating that pandemic. I'm not I'm not looking for these things. They're just happening and they're affecting me. What would you say? What would you all say to that statement? Again, which is real world. And I'll ask you to take that one first, as you reflect on these real world current events.
Well, I think to each his own and how we internalize. And I remember something that I heard, and I don't remember exactly where it came from, that said, why we should all be involved, right? And it goes like this. It says, they came for the Jews. I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't say anything. They came for the Catholics, and just smiling because you know where I'm going, right? They came for the Catholics, and I wasn't Catholic, so I didn't say anything. They came for the Protestants, and of course, because I'm not Protestant, I didn't say anything. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to say something. And I heard the president, I can't remember his name, that was being interviewed on 60 Minutes. Somebody help me with
Zelensky. Is that you talking about Ukraine or no?
Yes,
somebody else?
Ukraine president, and he was being interviewed, and he was answering the question about why should the U.S. care? And he said, do you think they're going to stop with me? They're not going to stop with me. They're going to keep going. And when he said that, I was reminded of that point about when they came for me, there was no one else. There was no one left. And that's what happens, going to your question. I think that when we take a lackadaisical and a passive attitude about things that we see that's going on around us, when we have the wherewithal and the resources to do something. And oftentimes we say, well, I don't have any money. I don't know anybody. Yes, but you have a representative in Congress and a senator in Congress. You can write letters. You have the ability to pray. There's so many things we can do that, again, going back to the mind, if we put the mind to work, we want to transmute. I'm going to keep going back to this principle of sex transmutation. It is a transference of energy. How do we take that, oh, woe is me energy and transfer it? And I do want to take a moment and go back to a question that you asked, if I may.
Please.
Okay, you asked a question earlier about what can we do when all of these things happen. And I was reminded by something by Charles Fillmore, I think it is, in the book called Prosperity. I love, just a paragraph a night. And it's interesting that one of the things I read last night by him talked about how, when all of these things are happening to us, how do we overcome and align ourselves with harmony in order to connect to divine thought? How do we connect to the infinite within us with these thoughts to guide us? And I thought that was so interesting because we're talking about autosuggestion. We're talking about sex transmutation and the subconscious mind and learning how to connect these two. And then he talks about what we can do is learn how to connect these dots from the subconscious mind and the superconscious mind. And the way we do that, number one, he said, meditation. Meditation. Number two, he said, silence. Silence. And then number three, he said, by speaking the word. Now, for me, what happens with my mind is like dots that connect. So one dot connected, I was reading in preparation for today, the subconscious mind connected to sex transmutation. And then I get to prosperity. And then my mind went back to something that was discussed in sex transmutation about the his name starts with a D, I can't think of it anyway, that talked about he sits for ideas in the dark. So we go back to the meditation, we go back to the silence, we go back to speaking the word. And these are three things that I would encourage all of you who are listening. When you find yourself in this place, whatever place that is, when things are going on around you, then you cannot control, go back to the wars. These three things we can do. We can meditate, we can go in silence, and we can also speak the word. And I would also say write the word. Those are some three things I would just like to suggest in going back to your question, Peter.
Yeah, thank you so much. Go ahead, Galen. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the chat is really on fire. It's just blowing up. I wanted to just acknowledge Donnelly has joined us here live in Zoom land. But there on YouTube, we've got Marguerite. We've got Johnny Lloyd. Musanda's joined us from Zambia, I believe.
Wow.
And one of the things that Johnny Lloyd has put in the chat that I want to bring into this conversation is, she says, is life happening through me or is it happening to me? And I want to add that to what Ann just said, or is life happening around me? I think things could be happening around me, but it's not necessarily happening to me. How can we disassociate ourselves from saying that this is happening to me and just observe it's happening around me? I can observe what's going on because it's happening around me. And I then get to decide whether or not this has a positive meaning or a negative meaning, but I get to choose that. And I keep going back to the symbolism that we can place on a rose, or the meaning that we can put on a note. It has no meaning in and of itself until we decide what that meaning is. And we can do that exact same thing when we're in these life situations. And before the show, we were talking about the importance of reframing. And Dr. Peter, I know that's a big part of what we do as coaches, is we help our clients reframe. It's just that when we're in it, it's hard for us to remember to reframe the situations. What are some, Peter, I'm going to come back to you. What are some things that you do to help yourself reframe what's happening around you? And specifically, you talked about being in the airport and kind of reframing what was going on around you so that it didn't consume you.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question there, Galen. And I will have to say that the way that I have become has not been overnight. I have had to practice all of these things that both you and Ann are talking about, are mentioning. I've had to reframe my mind into, when I get into these scenarios, which they happen, this is part of life. They'll happen over and over again. And something that you said there, Galen, you use that word choose. We have a choice. So yesterday I was in the airport and the plane was delayed over 2 hours and they moved the gate 5 times. The last time they moved it right back to where we started again. And during that moment, I was watching people running back and forth to these gates and just frustrated and just, it was angst. What did I really have control of during that moment? Let's start to identify all those things. I had control over my mind, my thoughts, my actions, my behaviors, what I communicate. We have lots of choices that we sometimes don't realize. We think that we have no choice, when in fact we can do many things. I love how Ann mentioned it earlier, and I even wrote those down: meditate, silence, speak the word. Right? We often tell ourselves that there's nothing that we can do. this is happening to me, as you mentioned, Galen. But I was, during those 2 hours, extremely productive. Wrote articles, did some stuff for client work I needed to catch up on. By the time we got on that plane, I almost was ready to just take a nap on the plane because I didn't really have nothing else to do. But I challenge everyone to ask ourselves is, how do you begin to wrap yourselves around what Galen have mentioning? This is just happening around me. It's not happening to me. And when you get to that realization, ask yourself the next question. And as a result of what's going on around me, what would I like to do right now? What do I need to do right now? And that's the choice you have to put into effect. And I will caution you, the choice is not the recommended choice is not to complain about it, but to, what are your actions? And I love some of those things that Ann has mentioned, or even some of those actions like writing your congressperson, or say if it's a pandemic, doing what you need to do to take care of yourself and your family. Right? We oftentimes just want to give up and wallow in the misery. And what does that really do at the end of the day? For yourself or for anyone around you? So I'll finish off by saying this there, Galen. What I've made it a point to do is, when I see that people, that's their pattern of wallowing in that misery, I honestly try to avoid them. I don't want to be party to that, because I'm not gonna respond in the way that continues that wallowing. I'm just not, because it's doing nothing for anybody.
What's interesting about that, and I want to bring in something that we talked about before we went live, is the energy that you send out is the energy that you attract. You attract more of the energy that you're sending out. So if you choose to evaluate a situation as being negative, and therefore you continue to try to prove to yourself that the situation is negative, you're going to attract more situations that are similar to that,
Yeah.
so that you can define them as negative. And so you're literally creating the very reality that you are hoping to avoid.
And to your point there, Galen, with that, what happens if you create that negativity, even in the good moments, you're seeing the negative in that. And we've seen that play in out, day out, with those around us, or sometimes even with loved ones, right? Hey, our time is getting short, but we have to answer a question that Donnelly just put in the chat for us. And I'm going to throw this at Ann McNeil there. And how have you learned to rest amidst things that we identify as chaotic or orderly? How have you learned to rest? What again, maybe what's some strategies that some of us could implement?
Can I do a rewind? I don't do chaotic.
Mhm.
I don't, Donnelly, I don't do chaotic, because over the years, I am learning, not have learned, I am learning to transmute my energy from something negative, chaotic, to something positive. So put in the chat for me real quick. Give me an example of chaotic. You see, because whatever you put in the chat, trust me, I will find a way to turn it into a positive. And I want to go back to something Johnny Lloyd said when she asked the question. She says, it's happening through me, what has around me. And I put in the chat, it's happening for you. That's for every one of us. Woe is me. Well, why not me? That's what Job said. Job, why not me, Job? Why not me?
Mhm.
Why? Because I am believing exactly what Peter said. When I say all things, and that's the process I go through. It's not
Yeah.
some of the things, it's every single one of them. Every single one of them. And it puts me on my knees. It keeps me in a prayerful mode, because it is not always how I think it should be. It is not always who I think it should be. It is not always just ask the people around me, because I do go off too, right? but finding a way to reframe it, to repurpose it, to transmute it, to tap into my subconscious mind. And a lot of times it requires me to go to your question. I take a moment, I step back and I process, because oftentimes I find when I jump to a quick conclusion, that is when that appears to be chaotic. But if I take a step back and I do what this book says, prosperity book, Charles Fillmore says, listen, meditate. Don't mean you have to wait till night or in the morning. In the moment, in the silence, because you can have noise all around you and actually be in silence. But it's a practice. It's a daily, it's a moment-to-moment practice, actually. So that would be my response. It does not change, because literally nothing is either good nor bad. And every time I remind myself of that, I ask myself, how do I choose to process this information to see it as good or bad, or just optimization data?
Hey, Peter, you're on mute, but I'd love for you to come in and talk a little bit about the annual meeting, because that's one of the places where we get almost like a vitamin boost.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm asking the teacher, may I, because I found, you don't mind, do you? I don't want to skip the line. Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Okay, in regards to the annual meeting, if you have your book, it's like we're in that other place, right? If you have your book, I want you to turn to the section that talks about the stimuli. And that is on page
192, I believe.
192.
While Anne's looking on that, folks, I would love what she said about practicing this. This is not just, it just happens tomorrow. How do you practice these actions and these behaviors, this thought process, so that when that time comes, you can rest in that practice? Go ahead, Anne.
Oh, you're going to rest in it. Go ahead. Rest in that practice. Okay. For the annual meeting, if you can pull up the JPEG, while you're pulling up the JPEG on page 190, starts with 191. As I was preparing for today, I said, oh my gosh, the 10 stimuli relates to the annual meeting. Well, except one of them, a couple of them. So talk about that. You're going to check the box. So the annual meeting is a place where we go annually to check in as an accountability for our life, written goals and accomplishments. And this year, coming up, 2024, we will be in Pompano Beach, Florida, at the Hilton, True by Hilton. And you can go to the International Masterminders with an S.com, and you can get the details, but please register there. It's going to be held on January 5th and 6th, 2024. But this is what I wanted to mention, and Galen and Peter, you can say whatever you want to say about the annual meeting, but think about this, the 10 mind stimuli. The 10 mind stimuli that Napoleon Hill talks about. When I started thinking about the 10 mind stimuli, I said, oh my gosh. The first one is, he said, human mind responds to stimuli through which it may be keyed up to high rates of vibration, known as enthusiasm, creative imagination, intense desire. Now, I said this because the desire is whatever you have whatever you're desiring for the 10 areas of your life. But the desire for sex expression, this is expression, number one. And when you think about the annual meeting, we have number 2, love. Number 3, we have a burning desire for power, financial gain, and or money. Number 4, we have music. And if you stop and think about when you come to the annual meeting, each of these, number 5, friendship between either those of the same sex or those of the opposite sex. We have that too. Number 6, a mastermind alliance based upon harmony of 2 or more people who ally themselves for spiritual or temporal advancement. Number 7, mutual suffering, such as that experienced by people who are or have been persecuted. We can relate to that too. Number 8, autosuggestion. Number 9, fear. And the one we don't have yet is number 10, narcotics and alcohol. say yet. But I would also challenge each of you that's listening. If you think about any conference, and this came to me as I was traveling this week in Boston, and also the Chicago Build in Chicago, but almost 9 of these exist in most conferences you attend for your industry. And as I was reading that, I thought about the annual meeting. So anyway, I'll go back to you, Galen and Peter, whatever else you're going to say about the annual meeting. But we do want to challenge each of you to please register, do not wait, and please be sure to bring your family. We also have an annual meeting for the children, and the children do meet every Saturday, every Sunday from 1:30 Eastern until about 2:30 Eastern time. And they read through this book a couple of pages a week. All right, thank you.
Whoa, lots of stuff, lots of stuff. Okay, folks, we may be going over a little bit today. But you know, this has been kind of deep. But as we get ready to land this plane a little bit, I want to go around the room and ask each of you what resonated, what stood out for you as we dove into this conversation. We didn't know it was going to be this deep around sex transmutation and the subconscious, but it was. What jumped off the page at you? And let us know how we can stay in touch with you as we move forward. Galen, I'm going to start off with you, if that's all right.
Yeah. So for me, I love the conversation because we got really deep into the connection between the subconscious mind and the ability to transmute sex. And for me, it's really about how do you observe the world and see that it's happening around you as opposed to feeling like it's happening to you. And I always liken my favorite Bible verse, all things happen for the good of those who love God and call according to his will. I always liken that back to my favorite detective TV show growing up, which was Columbo. I loved Columbo, and I think everyone here, I think we're old enough to remember Columbo. I love Columbo because there was never a question as to whether Columbo was going to get the bad guy. The question was always how. What was going to be the thing that he would identify that would allow him to catch the bad guy? And could I identify that thing first? That was the challenge. And for me, that's what this life thing is about. It's not a question of will you win? The question is how? It's not a question of will these things work for your good? For me, the question is, how in the world is this going to work for my good? How in the world is this war thing going to end up working for my good? Because I know that it is, I just don't see how yet. And if we can maintain that posture, then that would allow, I believe that would allow us to not feel like this is happening to us. It's just happening around us. My name is Galen Bingham. I'm the leadership strategist. You can find me on all platforms. You can go to my website, YouTube, all of that. The best way, the most fun way is to go to my podcast, Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership, on every podcast platform. I double dog dare you to try us at least once. Guarantee that you'll learn something.
Good stuff, Galen. Wow, powerful there. And McNeil, this has been a very deep and insightful, transmuted conversation.
Well, for me, I take it, it goes back to the principle of desire. And when Napoleon Hill gives us the 6 keys, and everything goes back there, because when you talk about transference of your energy in terms of sex transmutation, for what end, for what goal, for what purpose, for what amount of money. And I'd like to encourage all of you, if you'd like to connect with me, text the word "and" at 55678, and I will send you those 6, I call them my 6-point business plan, starting with how much you want and the rest of those points. Text the word "and," that's ANN, to the number 55678. And I think I'll also change my name on this Zoom so that if you're listening in the future, you don't have to rewind. You can just look at my name. Text "and." All right. that is how you can connect with me. My aha from the two principles is how closely they are aligned.
Mm.
My aha from the two principles today is how closely they are aligned, and how you need the subconscious mind actively in use in a positive way in order to transmute that energy from one form to the other.
I love that. And on the surface, and we would not necessarily say that they were aligned like that, but the truth be told, they are. So I truly appreciate this conversation. Let me just capture a few of the things that jumped off at me. Love that quote by William Shakespeare. There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so, right? We create meaning. Galen said we create meaning around everything in our lives. He also said, I'm in a situation. I am not the situation. And also finished it off with responding to how we should possibly respond to external stimuli. Meditate, number one. Silence, number two. Number three, speaking or writing the word, right? All of these are strategies, if I can again piggyback on what Ann mentioned, on how we can practice better so that when this type of stimuli does come, because it's coming, how we can respond. And you do have a choice on how to respond or to react, how we respond to these stimuli. What a powerful conversation, folks. My name is Dr. Peter A. James. I am the high performance coach helping you to shift your mindset. You can find me on any social media platform at Dr. Peter A. James. That's at DrPeterAJames. Specifically, LinkedIn is probably the fastest place to get me, but you can also find me at shiftyourmindset.com, where we challenge you to do a little bit of what we were doing today. Think differently. And then as a result of thinking differently, acting differently as well. And if you are on YouTube, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. You saw how powerful this conversation was today. This was just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to get even more deeper as we continue to go in. Same time, same channel. See you next week.